Well, good afternoon. I'm Paul Thornell again, board chair of the Joint Center, and we're really thrilled to have Senator Sherrod Brown with us today. I will not, yes. I will not do an extensive introduction. Senator Brown, of course, has been the chair of the Senate Banking and Housing Committee. You see, I got that. You thought I was going to say banking, right? Banking and Housing Committee. He is in his third term, running for his fourth term. And there probably is a short list of people that on the range of topics that the Joint Center has prioritized that we can look to as a consistent champion. And Chair Brown, you are certainly one of them.
Thank you.
I want to talk through just a handful of issues with the Senator. He really is a very short period of time. He was kind enough to fit us in between a Banking Committee hearing on a handful of nominations and a Senate vote that's at 1:45. So we're going to get right to it. Senator Brown, so last night we were thrilled to honor the Fed Board Governor, Lisa Cook, with our highest honor.
Good choice, Paul.
Well, yeah, pretty easy in my mind. But one of the things that I think we're so appreciative of is your leadership and partnership with the Joint Center, because her nomination to the Federal Reserve Board and confirmation was not an easy thing. It did not happen by accident. And you and others were consistent champion of hers. And I'm curious, just as it relates to the sort of process by which she went through nomination, confirmation, and the other Fed governors, do you have any insights, just takeaways from that relative to the issues that we care about as an organization and you prioritize, and the effort to sort of give voice to those issues on and off the Hill that led to her successful confirmation?
Thank you, and thank you. I know that her successful confirmation, Paul had a lot to do with that. A lot of you had a lot to do with it, so thank you. I think I'd say get involved early on this. The term you learn that in high school, advise and consent, you don't hear much about that now, but advise and consent means that activists, not just House and Senate members, but activists like so many of you weigh in early, you weigh in with the White House. And my job as chair of the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee is, as Paul said, it used to just be called the Banking Committee because it was all about Wall Street. And when I took over that chairmanship in January of 2021, that committee, nobody just calls it the Banking Committee now. They call it Banking, Housing, or Housing Banking. A lot of focus on housing and a lot of focus on public transit. Because we know how important investment in that is. So that was a bit aside, but the advise and consent, we went to the White House early, partly at Paul's urging, partly at the urging of several people I see in this crowd. We went to the White House early and say, we've got to change the way the Federal Reserve looks and the way the Federal Reserve thinks. So over a process of a couple of years, Lisa Cook was the first, and maybe the hardest, because frankly, she's an African-American woman that didn't teach at Harvard or Yale or Stanford, frankly, because that's the pipeline too often for jobs in this town. And so she happened to grow up in a small town in Georgia. She teaches at Michigan State. She's a superstar. We found her, she found us, we found her early. The administration was very cooperative with her. They were then very cooperative with Jefferson. They were then very cooperative on a longer process with Dr. Kugler. So though it's never easy in confirmations when one political party doesn't really believe in the role of government, doesn't believe that housing is a public purpose, doesn't believe in investing in transit, believes much more in Wall Street and the whole Wall Street construct in this town. So we've over the period of time then, we go to the White House, we talk to them. I talked to Lael Brainerd, she's one that helped us with Kugler, that just spoke to you. And then we need to lobby our colleagues, and we need you to lobby our colleagues. And Lisa, so when I look at this now, we have a Federal Reserve of 7 members. I believe there have been 3 African Americans in the Federal Reserve since it started in 1913 or 1914. 3 total out of 7. Never a Latina. There had been a couple of Latinos, I think, but I can't remember who they were. But it's mostly people that look like me. And so it's not just diversity, because I believe as a growing up in this country, growing up with a progressive mother who ran the YWCA, and the slogan of the mission of the YWCA is to eradicate racism and promote women's rights. It was way more, it was that But it's also, look what happens when you have a diverse. Look at what happens now. We have an African-American man, an African-American woman, never two at the same time on the Fed, and a Latino on the Fed, 3 out of 7. But it's not just, again, the diversity of how people look, but the diversity of how they were brought up, how they think. So just like I didn't play a big role in this, I voted, and done it in my own state. We have 140 federal judges we have confirmed since January of 2021. 60% women, 65% of color. But as important as that diversity is, they're now civil rights lawyers, they're labor lawyers, they're poverty lawyers, they're people they're legal services lawyers, not just corporate lawyers from big law firms. And the same with the Fed now. We have people who are labor economists, people who have studied poverty in their career. So they will bring a very different view to the Federal Reserve. Again, not just because of race and gender, really important, but because they have a different view of the world that will make this country better. And somebody, I know the Supreme Court in this crowd, and to me is not the most popular institution, doesn't deserve to be, but the economy, the Federal Reserve Court is kind of the Supreme Court of the economy. And but they're a whole lot better than the 9 people, than 6 of the people in the court. Now, I won't mention which 6, but I think you can figure that out, right, Paul? So anyway, that's the backstory, and that's why this is really exciting. We advised the White House, listen, they didn't do everything we wanted. They came back with these, we confirmed them. Lisa in a very close vote twice. Kugler, fairly close vote, and Jefferson for whatever reason, other than he's male perhaps, but the other reason that Jefferson was a little easier.
Right, excellent. So get involved early. So being in the room matters. That's a critical part of the administration personnel piece. Yep. But certainly it does as it relates to staff diversity on Capitol Hill. And I think one of the things that's certainly an area we've prioritized, and we've appreciated your recognizing the importance of it. You have, I think, one of only 2 blacks in the Senate who carry the title Communications Director is your Banking Committee's Communications Director. And certainly for a period of time, you had the only black chief of staff until she retired earlier this year, I think. The numbers by any measure in terms of Senate staff diversity at the highest levels are abysmal. And there's clearly a recognition that something needs to be done. I'm curious, what have you found as you engage with your colleagues are the elements of a successful approach to increasing staff diversity that you think your peers, other senators, are successful in being intentional about? What do you think works? What do you think works in terms of our engaging with senators to lift up this issue to help them consider ways to make it
Thank you, Paul. That's none of us does well enough. None of us. I mean, I shouldn't say none of us. I should say I don't do well enough with hiring, and I would say that the overwhelming majority of my colleagues don't. And there are a lot of reasons for that, no excuses, but we've got to do better. And part of it is sort of who knows whom in this town. And you're standing up and suggesting names. Paul does that with me pretty regularly and has helped us too often. I mean, we know the pattern in Washington. We know the pattern in corporate America. We know the pattern throughout the country. If you go to the right private school and you have the right daddy, occasionally mommy, and you have the right connections sometimes as contributors, but not always, you end up you have a leg up on all of this. I mean, that's the story of America. It's the story of corporate America too. But that's why all of us, including, I don't want to sound lectury, but why all of us have to do a better job. One of the things we've kind of tried to do, in addition to what Paul said as our former chief of staff before she retired, was that we've started, and more people are doing that, paying interns, because you know how this pipeline works. My wife is named Connie Schultz. She's a Pulitzer Prize winning writer, never won before or since at the Cleveland paper. She went to Kent State. She couldn't get an internship as a writer with the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. Those almost always went to kids that went to Harvard or Yale. I went to Yale, so I'm not bashing schools, but I also know that and I didn't have family members, anything like that, but I didn't go because I was a great basketball player either. But anyway, I do know that this pipeline makes it a lot harder. So we started paying interns. More and more people are doing that. So, I have interns from, we get them from Ohio State, we get them from Kent State, we get them from Central State and Wilberforce. We all need to do better, but we've got to have you all engage with people who are already professionally at a certain level. But we also need you engaged, and you in the broad sense, for young people in school that are looking for opportunities for community and government service, and get them in the door, because we hire much from our intern class, because we get to see which ones are committed, which ones have good work ethics, which ones. But I want to take it to a different place if I could, without filibustering this. One of the places we really need to work, and this probably isn't most of you, is the building trades. We passed a huge infrastructure bill. We need many more people to be carpenters and electricians and sheet metal workers. They are overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male. These are jobs that you join an apprenticeship program. You go straight into an apprentice where you're paid $20 an hour, and your health benefits and retirement. You go through 5 years, you have a middle class wage. That's probably not for a lot of your sons and daughters. Maybe it is, but it's a whole part of society we got to do better. So I spoke at a building trades pre-graduation a few months ago in Columbus, where there were a bunch of inner city kids who didn't have any end to be in these jobs. They had about 20 of them. As soon as they complete this 12-week program, they will be in the building trades. And these are kids who haven't had much opportunity in life, and they're going to be carpenters and electricians and sheet metal workers. They're going to be making, by the time they're 30, $70,000 an hour more if they want to work overtime and be able to buy a house and raise kids. So it's here among professionals, people that go to college. It's also everywhere else about getting kids that opportunity to get ahead in whatever trade or job they choose to begin with.
Excellent. I want to talk a little tax policy. We had Professor Dorothy Brown here earlier from Georgetown, who gave a really insightful and provocative conversation on the connection between tax policy and racial equity issues. From where you sit, you focus a lot of time on this, in addition to being chairing the Banking Housing Committee. Of course, you've been on the Finance Committee for a while. Can you talk a little about right now, sort of where you see the interplay between some of the various tax reform issues on Capitol Hill? You've prioritized, of course, the extension of the enhanced child tax credit. But how do you see year-end that playing relative to other issues, and what the connection is, and why people in the room should care about tax policy?
Well, everybody should. I understand most people don't, and it's kind of boring, But every year, almost every year, the Senate does a tax bill at the end. Every couple or 3 years, does a tax bill at the end of the year. It's always about corporate interests. It's always about those who have much getting more, typically. And we have said no more of that until you extend, as Paul said, extend the enhanced child tax credit. And let me tell you a real quick story. Best moment of my career. It was in March of 2021. We passed this omnibus bill, if you will, and it had an enhanced child tax credit in it. So we passed it, and I've been working on this for 8 years, I think. We could never get it. Trump had no interest. We couldn't get it through a Republican Senate. Some Democrats weren't even on board. We ended up passing this child tax credit by one vote. The vice president came in and voted for it, making 51 to 50. No Republicans, all the Democrats stayed together. I called Janet Yellen, Secretary of the Treasury, the day after Biden signed it in late March, early April. She called the IRS commissioner, who was a Trump nominee but was a decent guy, and to get it up and running by July 1st, child tax credit was in place. And what it does, it affects 90% of the children in this country, the families of 90%. So the 10% wealthiest kids didn't benefit, but 90% did. And what that meant is if you have 3 kids and one of them is under 6, you get $300 per month for that child, cash. If 2 of them are over 6, you get $250 plus you get $500. So a family of 3 would get $800 a month from the federal government check. And some people say, well, you're giving money away. Well, we know how that affects people. And not to mention, it dropped the child poverty rate by 50% right off the bat. But think of what this did to families that mostly don't go to events like this. Families that are struggling, middle-class families, even slightly upper middle-class families, poor families. Everybody this affected everybody. In Ohio, 2 million children benefited. The families of 2 million children. If we could have kept it going, we only had it a year, as you know, because we couldn't get the votes again. But that's my top priority when I'm reelected in 2024 is to come back and do that in early 25. That's something, and the good news is that Democrats are saying if corporations want tax breaks, they're gonna pass this, period. And if they don't, they're not gonna get the tax breaks they want unless a child tax credit. So everybody that comes to see me, every CEO, every person advocating for tax breaks, the conversation is, I want to help you if I agree with them, and many I do, R&D tax credit, things like that. I want to help you, but nothing's happening unless we do the child tax credit. It's going to make all the difference in the world.
You know, one question, maybe a follow on that. Why don't you think it was recognized as a more essential asset, or said differently, why wasn't there a significant groundswell of support or opposition to its expiration? In polling data, it shows that it was not, people almost didn't feel like it was taken away, or it was there in the first place, or maybe it was just a part of all the COVID relief. That was a very curious
I can't
piece,
figure
don't you
that
think?
out. I think it was mostly what you just said. It's part of COVID relief. It was sort of left over from the Trump years and the COVID investments, and we lost one Democrat is all. He wasn't changing his mind, it looked like, and we just realized it wasn't going to happen. But we want to, next year, if the stars align, we're not going to settle for 1 year. It's going to be 3 years, 5 years, permanent something. But it really was, you're right. And then there's all these stories about poverty going up last year. Well, it did, because this kept so many people out of poverty. And there's just no excuse for that as a country. And you think of, some of you, I assume, have either been in families or seen families that just live almost hand to mouth. Think about this is a bit off, but Chrysler workers striking now called Stellantis in Toledo. Because of this tiered wage system, 6,000 workers there making good UAW wages, but less than it used to be. But 1,500 of those workers are making $19 an hour or less. And those are families, it affects the wealth of the community. If people are making $30 an hour versus $20 an hour, that's a whole lot of money being spent in the community, let alone those families that benefit. So we just don't make the economic arguments well enough and stand up in this whole belief. I don't think many people believe in, I know you don't, trickle down, Jerome. Trickle down, you give tax cuts to the wealthy and they trickle down. There's no evidence that works. There is evidence you put money in working class families' pockets or poor families' pockets, and everybody, the votes go up for everybody.
Right, absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about, we heard previously a few people from the administration talking about the industrial policy investments that have been made, which once in a generation points on the board, I think, that have been beneficial across all communities. But as you see things in Ohio, especially the communities that you regularly engage with, what are the things that you take away most when you hear from voters that they understand as, of all the things you passed, as the most important to them, or that they find to be most promising in terms of looking forward to?
Yeah, the political problem, I'll answer it, I guess, a couple ways, Paul. The political problem is with infrastructure and those investments is nobody really knows it yet.
Yeah.
The people that announced it, you do a press conference, you announce it, and people go on with their daily lives, right? They don't see the dirt turned over. They don't see a bridge being built yet. They don't see money in people's pockets. Their wages are flat. The biggest problem is people's wages are flat in this country still. I mentioned Stellantis. The CEO of Stellantis Corporation makes 365 times what the average worker at Chrysler makes. And the 800 times what the entry-level worker makes. And so people don't feel better until we begin to address that better. But I think we're starting to see, and for instance, one of the big investments in infrastructure is Ohio alone is going to have $700 million investment in enhanced broadband. And that's certainly rural Ohio. The FDR electrified the countryside, and rural Ohio is predominantly white, unlike rural Georgia or rural Louisiana. but it's also a lot of inner city neighborhoods don't have broadband, good broadband either. And that makes it harder to study because you can't keep up with your classmates if you don't have good broadband, if you don't have good internet connection. It makes it harder to get medical care because so many people are helping to get their doctor online. And it makes it harder to start a small business. And in the black community and in Appalachia, Ohio, and I don't make equivalents there except there are some, that it's hard to, it can help. Growth often comes out of somebody starting a business in their living room. And you can't really do that very well unless you have broadband. So that's one example. That's going to start reaching people, but it hasn't reached them yet.
Right. What do you think are some specific ways that these investments, whether it's infrastructure or chips, or certainly the Climate Bill, Inflation Act, how can those investments be more inclusive? How can they reach those communities?
Well, it's partly, I use the building trades as an example. There will be 7,000 building trades jobs, and those are sheet metal workers, pipe fitters, carpenters, bricklayers, painters, millwrights, in that one project to build that chips plant in Ohio. 10 years, 7,000 jobs. Those jobs, the building trades, there's a guy named Mike Nisley, long-term head of the Ohio Building Trades. He is committed to making the building trades different, attracting a lot more women, a lot more people of color. They want to do it. The question is getting young people into those positions. It's probably the biggest jobs growth of any place in the economy. And these are really hard jobs. You're working outside in cold Ohio days some days, in really hot Ohio August days. It's hard. It's a hard job mentally, and it's a hard job physically. But people take such pride in those jobs. Again, no student debt, and it will create a middle class. And when I grew up in a place called Mansfield, Ohio, and I went to Johnny Appleseed Junior High, if you can believe that was the name of it. And I went to junior high with a lot of sons and daughters, pretty integrated community, pretty diverse community. I don't know that the neighborhoods were particularly integrated, but the schools were. And my classmates were probably a fourth African American and probably a fourth Appalachian white kids. And their parents black kids were just beginning to get these good industrial union jobs at Westinghouse, General Motors, Mansfield Tire, steel mill. And then those jobs started going south to non-union states, and they went to Mexico. And this whole opportunity for African American kids to get working class kids to get good paying jobs just began to evaporate, and to the point that such a high percent of inner city black jobs now are the post office, but not building things. Those are good jobs, but not building things. We lost that. I don't mean we all go back to that, but I want those opportunities for your kids. Most of your kids, I assume, in this room are going to college. I want those opportunities here at the Capitol and doing all the kinds of things in tech that your kids maybe want to do. And I want those opportunities for working class and poor kids. My wife and I live in Cleveland. We live next door to the head of the Urban League. On the other side is an African-American union machinist that works in Alcoa. And our neighborhood is probably 30% black, probably 20% gay. It's a very interesting, diverse neighborhood. Those kids in that neighborhood are going to do pretty well because they've had some advantages. But a lot of kids in Cleveland, where I live, Cleveland, the zip code we live in, had more foreclosures in 2007 than any zip code in America. So we know that the struggles. My little area of 250 homes is a little more affluent than the rest of the zip code. But we know the challenges, and we've got to look at this for middle class and upper middle class kids, and we've got to look at it for working class and poor kids way better than we do.
Excellent. Well, Mr. Chairman, you've been generous with your time. We've covered a number of things. Are there any things that you want to leave us with that we didn't already discuss?
Yeah, one other thing. Well, yeah, sure, since you asked.
Okay.
I wear this lapel pin. It's a depiction of a canary in a bird cage. And you know the story of mine workers going down in the mines 120 years ago, and they had no union strong enough or no government that cared enough to help them. And I wear this on my lapel. It stands to me that it keeps me focused on when I talk about the dignity of work, a term that Dr. King popularized, as you may remember. Dr. King the histories of Dr. King aren't a lot about worker rights. They're mostly about civil rights and human rights, as they should be. But he was a real leader on workers' rights. Why was he in Memphis, right? To support the sanitation workers union and non-union alike. and how important it is to integrate that. So when you get elected to the Senate, they give you this really cool looking, very expensive pin that put on your lapel and saying, I'm a senator, I'm important. And I wore that like 2 days, and then I put this pin back on because it really helps me. Thanks. It helps me focus on what we ought to be doing there. So I just want to throw that in at the end.
Okay, good. Thank you.
That's fine, thanks. We're kind of quick. Thanks, everybody.